Most of you have probably heard the wild internet rumors about huge technology marketing budgets that the CMO is going to control. The idea that within a very short time, maybe a few years, that the budget that the CMO has for new technology is going to outstrip the CIO. Let's take a little poll. How many people think that that's too aggressive? Only a couple. How many people think it's about right? A few more. How many people think that it's too conservative, that it'll actually go faster? Yeah, a few here and there. So most of you are somewhat undecided. Well, let me share with you what IDC thinks. So if you were of the mind, whether you raised your hand or not, that idea that the CMO may have a really, really large technology budget is too conservative, you're probably right. Because IDC's data says that already business executives control more of the IT budget than the CIO does. And marketing is the fastest growing executive sector in that influence. IDC measures the technology industry. We have over 1,000 analysts worldwide. And in my area, the CMO Advisory Service, we work with dozens of CMOs in some of the most prestigious companies. And our data says that this is a really, really fast-moving effort. So the question is not really if the CMO is going to be the next technology power broker. That ship has already sailed. It's not a question of if, it's not a question of when. It's a question of how can the CMO make most use of the technology available in order to advance their own career as well as do what's best for their company. So one of the questions is can the CMO do this alone? Certainly there are a lot of cloud technologies out there and a lot of individual efforts. Can the CMO be successful with technology in this digital era without the assistance or with minimal assistance from the CIO? Well, let's take a look at where the relationship between the CMO and the CIO is today. The answer is, This is from an IDG study. And when CMOs and CIOs were asked about who was their most significant partner, each other came in a really, really weak and dismal third. I think this is a problem. Because I believe that the CMO and the CIO literally cannot be successful in today's world unless they have the support and alliance of each other. So let's talk about why that's true. Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, famously said, "There's only one boss, it's the customer. And he can fire anyone from the chairman on down simply by spending his money somewhere else." That's a fact in business, isn't it? Whoever owns the customer has the strongest influence on the revenue. And in today's world, that increasingly is the CMO. Because the internet, as you all know, this is your lives, that buyers are becoming more and more dependent on the internet and increasingly social and mobile to gain the information from about how to buy. Before the internet, the source of that information was the salespeople or the stores. But now that we have the internet, more and more of that information is coming from online. Our data shows that in B2B technology purchases, and you can look at the technology industry, which I study, as being sort of the advance guard for B2B, that 45% of the selling process in technology sales has been completed before the salesperson gets involved. Now, obviously, for consumers, that goes even farther. You can go all the way to e-commerce. So pick whatever number you want. But even in B2B, where the salespeople are very important, they are getting cut out of more and more and more of the selling process. So who owns the customer's voice? It's the CMO. And smart CEOs are starting to realize that this Facebooky, Twittery thing is not just a game for the marketing department. Instead, it's a game changer for the entire company. So is this a great time to be the CMO? With the rise of the social self-educated buyer comes the rise of the power of the CMO. Is this a great time to be the CMO? Or is it a terrifying one? Because with the rise of the social self-educated buyer also comes the disruption within the company. In the past, and again, as I think you know from your own experience, the CMO really had to do some awareness, had to build demand, get some leads, pass them off to sales. That's still the job of the CMO. However, now instead of having to manage just a few channels, now there are dozens of channels and campaigns have to be orchestrated across them. Instead of being able to pass off leads to sales because buyers are never, ever, 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 ever offline, the CMO can never hand off completely. And in addition to being able to do awareness and demand differently, there are things that the CMO has to do today that have never before haven't been done. Police the internet for risks to brand. How do you conduct a dialogue with someone via a screen in a real natural way? What are you going to do with all this data? Can the data be trusted? Where are all the skills going to come from? The money, the time? And more than any other executive, the CMO's work is on display for everyone at all times. So is this a great time to be the CMO, or is it a terrifying one? To succeed in this new world at all of those new tasks, the CMO desperately needs technology. There are 3 kinds of technology that the CMO needs in order to be successful. One is the systems of engagement. So systems of engagement are those technologies by which the digital dialogue takes place. These are the websites, the social media, the email campaigns, etc. Another type of technology that the CMO needs is the internal processes, so the marketing process management. This is the way to get rid of all of those spreadsheets. And finally, there's the data and analytics, which in my view is the most important. We're going to talk about that in just a second. So let's go through each of these just really quickly. So in terms of the systems of engagement, what IDC finds, we do a tech marketing benchmark every year. This is from our 2013 benchmark. That in B2B companies, in technology, again, you can look at these as being the advanced guard in B2B, that over 1/3 of the program's budget is now being spent in digital technologies. For a relatively sales-intensive industry, that's huge. So more and more and more of the CMO's job is dependent on being able to master the digital technologies by which we're communicating with customers. In terms of the business process automation, many of you may have been part of different internal business process re-engineering in your career. Maybe you were a part of coming up with e-commerce, or maybe you were a part of redoing the way that salespeople do their work with the CRM movement. Well, we're just at the beginning of this kind of conversion within marketing. You know what the disruption was like if you were a part of that, and marketing is just at the beginning of that disruption internally. I mean, if you think about it, I mentioned spreadsheets before. Imagine that you're a company like SAP and you're doing business in 140 countries in 20 different languages, or maybe it's 120 countries and 40 languages, but it doesn't matter. It's a huge number. And you're doing it all on spreadsheets. I mean, is it any wonder that marketing has gotten a reputation for being a little flaky? You cannot possibly be in control of that much complexity and be able to do that on spreadsheets. So the ability for marketing to get its control and do that business process reengineering internally is absolutely huge. And it touches not only marketing itself, but also touches all the back-end systems of the company. This is making marketing automation one of the fastest growing technology areas that exists today. And data and analytics. This is really exciting, and I'm sure that as you go through the day today, you're going to be seeing a lot. In fact, I would challenge you to be in any session that you go through today, which talks about the future of marketing, that doesn't talk about technology. I guarantee it will be in every single one. And especially people will be talking about data and analytics. The reason being that data is the technology that turns on the lights. It turns out that human beings are not quite as mysterious as we once thought that they were. We just were not able to see the patterns in behavior. So there's two kinds of analytics questions that marketing will be asking. There's the general reporting kinds of answers, or what happened, sort of gives us the look backwards, but helps us to keep in control. And then there's the more exciting behavioral analytics that allows us to be predictive. Think about what's the next best offer so that we can conduct that digital dialogue. In marketing today, we listen with data, we speak with content. You cannot have a dialogue without data. I took this from Loom Escape. This actually looks overwhelming, and if you think it's overwhelming, it's only because it is, and it isn't even the whole picture. It does not begin to touch the back-end systems that need to be integrated. It doesn't even have mobile really on it. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that are even missing from this chart. So, as a social self-educated buyer puts the marketer, the CMO, more and more in charge, and as CEOs start to realize that marketing is much more in charge of revenue than they ever were before, and because the CMO cannot be successful without being able to master technology, the CMO needs a partner with some serious, serious technical chops. But there's a problem, because both the culture of the marketing and the CIO are different. And as we saw before, neither one of them is really seriously engaged with each other on a large scale. Let's take an example. Let's say that the CMO wants to do something like upgrade the website. The CMO goes to the CIO, says, I want to upgrade the website. Now, most CIOs know, and we talk to a lot of CIOs as well, most CIOs know that they have to get more in charge of what's going on in the business. But unfortunately, that business does not really include marketing. And so the CIO is thinking, well, if the CRM system goes down, then the salespeople can't sell. And if the financial systems goes down, then we can't close our books. But if the website goes down, who really cares? Of course, the marketer, the CMO, is going like, I can't believe this. Can't believe this. And so they go around the CMO or CIO to do what the CIO calls shadow IT. So this might be shadow IT to the CIO, but to the marketer, to the CMO, it's an urgent priority. And so you have this standoff in most companies. Our research shows that 2/3 today of the marketing automation budget comes from marketing, and 1/3 comes from the CIO's budget. But the main reason why these two capable and knowledgeable executives cannot really come to see things in the same way is that they both have different strategies when it comes to technology. So the CMO has what you might call a compass strategy. Which way is true north? Because let's face it, the marketing technology era is just beginning. We're still learning. We have huge amounts to learn, and we're going to make a lot of mistakes. So there's a culture of innovation, kind of built into marketing's DNA anyway. But this idea that, you want to do a lot of pilots, you want to do a lot of testing, you want to, if you're going to fail sometimes, but you want to fail fast so that you can try again. This is not the same strategy that the CIO has. The CIO has what you might logically call a map strategy. When you've got to nail down all those security issues and you've got to make all of the bugs work, you have a much more conservative and risk-averse attitude towards what's going on in your world. Things just work better if you can have more of a waterfall approach where everything gets mastered and tied down before you go on to the next. Unfortunately, in the world of marketing, that doesn't work. Not only are we having to look at true north, but we also have to acknowledge the fact that the edge of the company where marketing works is a lot more chaotic. We're talking about human behavior. We're talking about human dialogue here. We're talking about buying. This is not the same as being able to control your accounting system. Two very, very, very different worlds. And in most companies, the CIO reports to either the COO or the CFO. And so the mentality that they have, not only from the natural way that technology works, but also from their metrics and who measures them and who cares, is very, very, very different than the CMO. So that's a problem. So what is it that we can do about this? The social self-educated buyer is completely changing business today. The CMO is gaining more responsibility for revenue. CEOs are starting to realize that customer experience and what happens on the internet is important to revenue. The CMO desperately needs technology in order to succeed. But the CMO cannot be successful without some serious, serious technical chops, which he or she could get from the CIO, but that relationship isn't really working that well. So what are the things that can be done to make the CMO and the CIO friends? Because this is actually happening in a few companies. So we work, as I talked about before, with a lot of technology companies. We talk to lots of CMOs, we talk to lots of CIOs and pairs of them. And while it's still very much in its infancy stage, I was a part of an IDG conference earlier in the summer where it was just all addressing the CMO-CIO relationship. And the conference organizers told me they had a heck of a time trying to find CIOs to come and talk about what they were doing successfully with marketing. CIOs are pretty freaked out about this. They're starting to get it. They're starting to realize this is the different world, and they do not know what to do. So when I would spend the last few minutes of my talk here to talk about what are some of the things that companies are doing to be able to make this relationship between the CMO and the CIO work. The first thing that has to happen is that the CMO has to be different. We recently did an interview with an executive from Spencer Stuart, one of the premier executive recruiters, who told us that the tenure for marketing for CMOs continues to extend. It's now at about 43 months. And the reason for that extension is primarily because what I'll call the old school CMO, the artsy, brandy kinds of CMOs, are being replaced by business-oriented CMOs. We see this everywhere. Is that anyone who has really just the Marcom-y, advertising-y, not that the art of marketing is ever going to go away, and that is super important. But now the CMOs that are being successful have to become the master of data, have to infuse science and the quantitative aspects of business into the way that they do their work. And it is these CMOs who are succeeding. So you can think about this in your own career, in your own company, with your clients, and you can pretty much tell which people are going to succeed and which people are going to fail over the next couple of years. So the CMO has to not be the black turtleneck person doing the alchemy in the corner, but now has to be a business person who is mastered the quantitative aspects of the science of what is now marketing, have to be completely reimagined as a role. So that's the first thing that we see. The second thing we see is that the CIO needs to be different than in the past. So both the role of the CMO and the CIO. Now the CMO is farther along, much farther along. But the kind of a person and the kind of a role that the CIO has to have has to be supportive in this case. And we already see, as I mentioned earlier and showed you the data, that's already starting to happen. Now, in some regards, the reason why business is taking a bigger control of the IT budget is that the CIO is just not stepping up. And so in some regards, the CMO is just kind of stepping into the gap that the CIO has left. But what we are seeing in leading companies is not only a different profile for the CMO, but we're also seeing a different type of a CIO. A CIO who's now comfortable with the idea that we're just working on a compass strategy, that we're working on true north. I think that's actually the CMO who's the lead dog there. But the CIO is going to be one of the pack. And we see relationships happening between CMOs and CIOs. In one company, Motorola Solutions, Eduardo Conrado is actually both the CMO and the CIO. So there's an organization, and what Eduardo told me when I talked to him was that when the CIO reports to the CFO or the COO, they get that mentality of cost cutting or operational efficiency, both of which are positive things. But if you want your innovation to come from customer experience, and you know that that customer experience is increasingly having to do with technology, where do you want your technology to report? So there's one company that's doing something very different and having CMOs and CIOs report to the same organization. But in any case, I believe that the CIO in the future will be more like HR. If you think about the way when you hire people, the HR is a very knowledgeable group and provides a lot of services when it comes to hiring. But they don't own the budget. They don't make the final decision. They don't even set their requirements. That belongs to the business group. So I believe that the CIO will move from a leading role in the buying of technology to being more of the supporting cast. The third thing that has to happen is that the organizational structure has to change. Now, this is probably one of the more difficult aspects of it. And what we're seeing is what is sometimes called a zipper organization. And the zipper organization is so called because there's interactions at every stage, at every level of the company. So it starts up at the top, like with what I mentioned at Motorola. If that's too extreme to have IT reporting to marketing, you could do something like is happening at Emerson Electronics, where Kathy Button-Bell, who's the CMO, and the CIO both report to a common executive who's called the Chief Innovation Officer. It has to happen at the middle ground. I mentioned SAP before. SAP cooperates between marketing and IT, a business intelligence office. And they both have funding, staffing, common metrics. They both take the wins and also the occasional failures together. It has to happen at the lowest levels of the company, within marketing and within IT. And we see that this is an area which is changing extremely rapidly. I was talking to a technology recruiting firm, and they were saying that more than a third of their new requests are going into marketing. So a third of the IT, at least from this one fairly good-sized company, is going into marketing. In our recent tech marketing benchmark, what we see is that roles that are related to data-driven marketing are the fastest growing in the marketing organization. And this is on pretty flat budgets for a lot of companies. So what you've got here is the analytics and BI. We opened up that as a new area this year. Marketing automation, marketing operations, which tends to run the systems as well as do things like planning and process improvements. And then finally, campaign management, which tends to be the drivers of these new data-driven campaigns that are increasingly cross-functional. So this is the fastest growing area in marketing. This is going to be also the most challenging area, because even though the cultural changes that need to happen in IT and in marketing are moving very, very quickly and will be problematic to some people, but it's going to be, at least you're going to be able to switch some people around. But the skills gap, both in IT and also in marketing, is going to be a serious, serious problem. If I was starting my career right now, that's where I'd head. And finally, we cannot leave this subject of what we can do to improve the relationship between the CMO and the CIO without talking about the C-suite, because everything starts at the top, doesn't it? Even though there's all this bottoms-up improvement that we can make, until the CEO and the CFO change their tune, there's going to be problems. So the CEO has to continue down this path of realization that the internet is not a trend, it is a game changer for the company. And they have to raise the stature of marketing within the organization to an equal stature with other C-suite executives. Today, although of course we have a lot of the CMO titles, the reality is a lot of the CMOs are not really in a strategic position. But that's changing in some companies, and in the more forward-looking companies, it's changing very rapidly. So the CEO has to change his or her attitude towards what marketing is all about. The CFO has to start to fund a little bit of customer experience R&D. The CFO, who can be even more conservative than the CIO, has to realize that you can't get an ROI on every single thing that you do in marketing. I like to say that marketing is not a candy machine. You can't put in a couple quarters and get out a Snickers bar of leads or whatever it is you're trying to do. It's much more complex than that, particularly in B2B. And you're going to have to accept some of this failure. If customer experience is the frontier, then that's something that everyone's going to have to get a little used to working in this new way. I want to end here with this essential guidance from Charles Darwin. In the long history of humankind and animal kind too, that those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. So today, the culture of the CMO and the CIO might be radically different. They might be distant third in their appreciation of each other. But if either one of them is going to succeed in today's digital era, that alliance is going to have to be formed. And as you go through the next few days, and as you ponder and explore the future of marketing, I would challenge you to look at your own careers as well as what's going on in your company and think about what you are going to do to push this particular bar. The leaders are doing it, and this is far too important an issue for you to sit on the sidelines. So enjoy the rest of the day. I will be around if you have questions. And it's going to be a fabulous day. Thank you very much for your time.